Tobias Everett was 41 years old, and until that Friday morning in a downtown Charlotte law office, his wife had already decided he was worth nothing. He drove a 10-year-old Camry, packed his lunch every day, pulled a civil engineer's salary that Claudette had stopped pretending to respect years ago. To her, he was ordinary, stable enough to use, predictable enough to leave, and too simple to see it coming. She had spent 4 years planning her exit, 18 months coordinating the timeline with another man, and had the divorce papers ready before his grandfather's body was cold. Then the lawyer read Tobias's inheritance, $1, and Claudette laughed. Not a polite, uncomfortable exhale. A real laugh, sharp and involuntary, escaping before she could pull it back. She covered her mouth. She apologized. But it had already happened. In a room full of witnesses, she had shown exactly who she was. She had no idea the lawyer hadn't finished reading, because underneath that $1, sealed in wax for decades, hidden in a private trust placed in Tobias's name alone 17 years before he ever met her, sat $312 million. And when that number landed in the room, every calculation Claudette had ever made collapsed in real time, right there in her chair, while Tobias sat completely still and didn't say a word. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The coffee had gone cold. Tobias noticed it the way he noticed most things, quietly, without making a fuss about it. He wrapped both hands around the mug anyway. The ceramic was still faintly warm against his palms, and outside the kitchen window, the October sky sat flat and gray over the rooftops of his Charlotte neighborhood. The kind of sky that made everything look like it had already been decided. The letter was on the table in front of him. Cream-colored envelope, heavy paper stock, the kind that cost money and was meant to communicate that fact. In the upper left corner, embossed in clean, dark ink, Okafor and Associates, attorneys at law. He had read it twice already. He read it a third time now, slowly, the way his grandfather had taught him to read anything that mattered. Dear Mr. Everett, it is with deep sorrow that we inform you of the peaceful passing of Cornelius James Everett, age 94, at his residence in Birmingham, Alabama, on the evening of October 21st. Tobias set the letter flat on the table. He sat with the stillness for a moment, just the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a neighbor's car pulling out of a driveway. He was not a man who fell apart easily. Cornelius had seen to that. But he felt the weight of it settle into his chest, like something permanent being put down. 94 years old. Hands like two slabs of carved oak, a voice that moved slowly and landed hard. He thought about those hands, about sitting across from the old man at his kitchen table in Birmingham when Tobias was maybe 12 years old, watching Cornelius lay his palm flat on the surface and say, without particular drama, the way he said most things that mattered, "What's under this hand is mine. What I don't show you, you can't take. You understand me, boy?" Tobias had understood him. He understood him better now, 30 years later. A full hand and a quiet mouth will take you further than a loud voice and empty pockets every single time. You remember that. He had remembered it. He had built his entire adult life around it. The modest house on this modest street, the decade-old Camry in the driveway, the civil engineering salary that was comfortable but not conspicuous, the packed lunch in its worn insulated bag sitting ready by the door. He presented to all outward eyes as a thoroughly ordinary man, and he had never once felt the need to correct that impression. He heard Claudette before he saw her. The rhythm of her heels on the hardwood upstairs was something his body had memorized long ago. The particular cadence of a woman who moved through the world with intention. Then the stairs, then the kitchen floor. She entered the room already fully assembled. A structured burgundy blazer, hair done with the precision of a woman who understood that appearance was its own kind of argument. She had a client presentation this morning. He had known that the night before. She poured her coffee without looking at him. Then she looked at him. "Morning." Her voice was warm. It was almost always warm in the mornings. He said, "Good morning." He watched her eyes drop to the letter on the table. She crossed to him, leaned in gently, one hand coming to rest on his shoulder, and read over his arm. He felt her go still as she took it in. "Oh, Tobias." Soft, appropriate. Her hand pressed once, firmly, on his shoulder. "I'm so sorry. He was such an incredible man." "He was," Tobias said. "You must be devastated." She straightened. Her eyes moved back down to the letter. And for just a half-second, not long enough for most people to catch, her gaze stopped moving. It landed on the law firm's name in the upper left corner and held there, Okafor and Associates. Then she pulled her eyes back to his face, and her expression was soft and present and completely composed. "Should I come?" she said. "To the reading, on Friday. I can move my afternoon." "I'll let you know," he said. She nodded. She kissed his cheek, the left one, the way she always did, and she picked up her coffee and her bag, and she left. The front door closed with a clean, quiet click. Tobias sat with the letter another moment. Then he picked up his phone and dialed. Adaize Okafor answered on the second ring. Her voice carried the particular ease of someone who had been managing important things for a very long time without ever dropping any of them. "Tobias, I've been thinking of you this week. Thank you." He looked at the letter. "Friday at 10, I'll be there." "Good." A brief pause. "The reading will take approximately 2 hours. I want you to know that your grandfather left very precise instructions about how the proceeding is to be conducted. Instructions I'm not at liberty to discuss over the phone." Tobias heard the weight sitting underneath that sentence, felt the shape of it without being able to see inside it. "I understand," he said. "We'll go through everything on Friday. Together." He thanked her. He ended the call. He sat for one more moment at his kitchen table in the flat gray October light. Then he finished the cold coffee, picked up his lunch bag, and went to work. He thought about Cornelius the entire drive in. The offices of Okafor and Associates occupied the 14th floor of a building on Tryon Street that communicated authority through restraint. No marble atrium, no oversized logo, just a quiet reception area with cedar-paneled walls and low lighting, and the kind of furniture that had been chosen by someone with genuinely good taste, rather than someone trying to display it. Tobias arrived 7 minutes early. He always did. Claudette arrived with him, which she had arranged by presenting it not as a request, but as a settled fact over Thursday night's dinner. She had dressed for the occasion the way she dressed for everything she considered strategically important. A charcoal wrap dress, her good jewelry, the structured leather portfolio she carried to client presentations tucked under one arm, with a pen already clipped to the cover. She greeted the receptionist warmly. She greeted Adaize Okafor when the attorney appeared in the doorway of the conference room with a particular warmth that Tobias recognized, the specific frequency she deployed toward professional women she wanted to impress. Adaize received it graciously and revealed nothing. She shook Claudette's hand, said she was glad she could attend, and gestured them both inside. The conference room was long and quiet. A mahogany table ran its length. At the far end, a sealed file box. Beside the file box, a stack of documents organized with the precision of someone who had been preparing them for a very long time. Adaize took her seat at the head of the table. Tobias sat to her right. Claudette sat beside him, portfolio open, pen uncapped. 2 of Cornelius's cousins participated by phone, their voices faint and tinny through a speaker in the table's center. A notary was present. A court reporter sat in the corner with her machine. Adaize began. Her voice was level and unhurried as she moved through the bequests. A modest sum to a cousin in Birmingham who had helped care for Cornelius in his final year. A donation, generous by any reasonable measure, to the 16th Street Baptist Church, where Cornelius had been a member for 50 years. A contribution to an Alabama Historical Society that preserved records of black land ownership going back to Reconstruction. Cornelius had cared deeply about that one. He had never said so out loud, as far as Tobias knew. He had simply written the check. Each bequest was read with care. Each recipient, reached by phone or represented by counsel, confirmed their understanding. The room maintained the particular hush of a space where something real was happening. Then a daisy turned the page. "To my grandson, Tobias Allen Everett," she read, her voice carrying the same level tone it had held throughout. "I leave the sum of $1 and all rights, titles, and designations contained in the sealed instrument marked Exhibit A, to be opened and read in the presence of all parties at this proceeding, per the decedent's explicit instruction." The room went still. $1. The sound came before Claudette could stop it. A sharp exhale, half breath, half something else, that escaped through her nose and the corner of her mouth in the half-second before her hand came up to cover it. Short, involuntary, unmistakable. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. Her hand was pressed flat against her lips. "I don't know why. I'm so sorry." She composed herself quickly. She was good at that. But the laugh had happened. It sat in the room the way a dropped glass sits in a restaurant. Everyone hearing it, no one looking directly at it, the sound already absorbed into the walls, but somehow still present. Adèle did not acknowledge it. She did not pause, did not glance up, did not alter her expression by a single degree. She simply continued. She explained, in the same level and unhurried voice, that per the decedent's binding written instruction, the sealed instrument marked Exhibit A would be opened and read aloud in its entirety at a subsequent legal proceeding. Today's reading of the primary will was now formally concluded. She thanked all parties for their attendance. She began gathering her documents. Tobias said nothing. He watched Adèle's hands move across the papers. Steady, efficient, unhurried. He did not look at Claudette. The drive home was quiet. Claudette filled it carefully. She was sympathetic. She was gentle. She said that $1 was a strange provision. Perhaps there had been estate debts Cornelius hadn't disclosed. Perhaps his finances were more complicated than anyone had realized. Perhaps the Exhibit A instrument was itself of modest value, a sentimental thing, a letter or a deed to that old property in Alabama that probably had more meaning than market worth. She framed all of it kindly, as though she were helping him process disappointment. Tobias said, "Maybe." He drove. He watched the road. He let her talk. That evening she cooked, a real dinner, the kind she made when she was managing something. Roasted chicken. A bottle of red she opened without asking. She set the table the way she set it when they had guests, with the good placemats. They ate. He thanked her for the meal. The wine was good. The conversation was light, careful, and mostly hers. She mentioned, at some point near the end of the meal, that she had been thinking, gently, she said gently, about whether Tobias might want to consider retaining separate estate counsel. Someone less personally connected to the Everett family. Someone more objective, who could give him an independent view of the process going forward. She said it with complete compassion. Tobias looked at her across the table. "Adèle has handled the Everett family's legal matters for decades," he said. "I trust her completely." Claudette said, "Of course." She poured him more wine. She did not raise it again. Sunday morning, Tobias woke to an empty bed. There was a note on the kitchen counter. Claudette's handwriting, neat, looping, unhurried. "Visiting Maya. Back by evening. Don't wait up for dinner." XO. Her overnight bag was gone from the closet shelf. The good one, the structured weekender she used for trips that required presentation. He could not recall her mentioning Maya in any conversation this week. He could not recall, when he stood quietly in the kitchen and thought about it carefully, her mentioning Maya's name in any conversation in several months. He noted it. He did not dwell on it. He made coffee. He went about his Sunday. The certified letter arrived Monday evening. He found it among the regular mail when he came home from work, distinguished from everything else by its weight, by the return address in the upper left corner, by the green and white card attached to the back that required his signature. He signed for it on the porch. He went inside. He stood at the kitchen counter and opened it. He read it once. He read it again. Claudette had retained counsel. She had filed for divorce. He stood with the letter for a long moment. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car moved slowly down the street, and then was gone. He folded the letter carefully. He returned it to the envelope. He sat down at the kitchen table. The same table, the same chair, the same flat gray light coming through the window, and he picked up his phone. A Daisy answered before the second ring. "I've been expecting your call," she said. "Come in tomorrow morning. Don't respond to anything, don't sign anything, and don't move any money." He said, "There's a continuation hearing for the estate. 3 weeks out," she said. "And Tobias, I want you to make sure Claudette's counsel knows she should be present for it." He looked at the envelope on the table. "Why?" "Because Exhibit A gets read at the continuation," Daisy said. "Your grandfather was very specific. He wanted all interested parties in the room when it's opened." The line was quiet for a moment. Tobias said, "I'll make sure she's there." 3 weeks later. The conference room was off the main corridor of Mecklenburg County Family Court, a spare, rectangular space that smelled of recycled air and old carpet. Fluorescent panels ran the length of the ceiling. A long table sat beneath them, surrounded by chairs with padded backs the color of ash. There was one window, narrow, with a view of the parking deck across the street. It was not the kind of room where anyone felt comfortable. That was, Tobias understood, the point. He sat beside Daisy at the respondent's table, dark suit, hands flat on the table in front of him. He had been still since he sat down. Across from him, Claudette took her seat beside Jeffrey Bale, her attorney, a sharp-looking man in his mid-50s with silver at his temples and the practiced calm of someone who charged by the hour and felt no urgency about it. Bale had a yellow legal pad in front of him, a pen in his hand, and the settled posture of someone who believed he already understood the shape of this proceeding. Claudette had dressed with precision. Dark blazer, silk blouse, earrings she only wore to meetings she considered important. Her leather portfolio was open on the table. Her pen was uncapped. She had arranged her materials the way she always arranged them, neatly, deliberately, like a woman who intended to take notes and use them. In the chair along the wall, Patrice sat with her hands in her lap and her eyes on her brother's back. Daisy had designated her formally as a family witness to the estate proceeding. She had arrived before everyone. She had not spoken to Claudette when Claudette entered, and Claudette had not spoken to her. The court reporter settled her machine in the corner. The room arranged itself into its final configuration. Adiz opened her file. She explained, for the record, that the estate of Cornelius James Everett included a sealed instrument designated Exhibit A, which, per the decedent's legally binding written instruction, was to be opened and read aloud in full, in the presence of all interested parties, a designation that by operation of law now included any party to active litigation affecting the primary heir. Bale nodded. He made a note. Claudette's pen was ready. Daisy reached into the file and withdrew a cream-colored envelope, heavy stock. The seal on the back was dark red wax, pressed flat with a stamp Tobias recognized from childhood, the block initial E that Cornelius had used on every document that carried something real inside it. Adiz broke the seal. The wax cracked along the edge with a sound like a small, clean break. She unfolded the document inside with both hands. She flattened it against the table. She began to read. The estate of Cornelius James Everett included 14 parcels of land across Alabama, Georgia, and North Carolina, purchased between 1941 and 1978, held inside a family LLC registered in North Carolina, with Tobias Allen Everett listed as the sole named successor trustee. She read each parcel by legal description. She did not rush. Timber rights on 6 of those parcels, she continued. Active leases. Quarterly income generated without interruption since 1987. A private investment account opened in 1991. Funded from land and timber revenues, managed under a discretionary investment mandate for 33 years. She turned the page. Claudette had been writing. Small, neat notes in the margin of the portfolio. Shorthand Tobias could not read from across the table, but he could see her hand moving steadily, gathering, cataloging, running numbers against numbers in her head the way she always did when she was building toward something. Then Adizay read the last item. Her voice did not change. It stayed level and unhurried, exactly as it had been throughout. A private trust account established in the name of Tobias Allen Everett, solely, on March 14, 2003. Claudette's pen stopped moving. Funded consistently and substantially by Cornelius James Everett, from the date of establishment through the date of his death, without interruption, and without disclosure to any party outside the trust instrument itself. The room was very quiet. Adizay set the document flat on the table. She looked up. The total current valuation of the Everett estate, she said, inclusive of all land holdings, income-generating instruments, and the primary trust account, as certified by independent appraisal dated October 31st of this year, is $312 million. The court reporter's fingers kept moving. Jeffrey Bale's pen did not. He sat with it touching the legal pad, not pressing, not lifting, just stopped. His eyes were on Adizay. His expression was the expression of a man revising something very large, very quickly, in private. Claudette did not move at all. She sat with her portfolio open in front of her, her pen still in her hand, her notes half finished. She was not writing. She was not breathing in any way that showed. She was sitting with the absolute stillness of a person whose body has received something that the mind is not yet finished calculating. Adizay continued without pause. The trust had been established in 2003, 5 years before Tobias met Claudette, 17 years before the marriage. Under North Carolina law, and per the explicit language of the trust instrument, these assets were premarital separate property in their entirety, not subject to equitable distribution, not part of the marital estate. They were not reachable by any divorce claim, under any legal theory, by any argument Jeffrey Bale or any other attorney could construct. She placed a document in front of Bale. 40 pages, tabbed, organized by section. 3 independent estate law specialists. Every appraisal certified. Every chain of title documented from its origin. Bale picked it up. He turned to the first tab. He began to read with the focused attention of a man looking for an opening, and not finding one. The room held its silence. Tobias had not looked at Claudette during the reading. He looked now. She was staring at the surface of the table. Her jaw was set. Her pen was still held loosely in her fingers, as though she had forgotten it was there. And behind her eyes, and he knew this woman's face, 8 years across every kind of mourning had given him that. He could see it. The arithmetic. The columns running. The number she had walked into this room preparing to reach, assembling itself into a shape that was closed, and locked, and permanent, and completely beyond her. She felt him looking. She raised her eyes. He held her gaze. He did not speak. He did not move. He did not give her anger or satisfaction or grief. He gave her nothing except his eyes, steady and clear, and all the silence that lived behind them. After a moment, she looked away. He looked back to Adaize. "What's next?" he said. Adaize closed her file with both hands. "Now we proceed with the divorce." Tobias nodded. He pushed back his chair. He stood, picked up his briefcase, and buttoned his jacket. He did not look at Claudette again as he moved toward the door. He did not need to. Bale was still reading. Claudette was still sitting, portfolio open, pen in hand, notes that stopped halfway down the page, holding 40 pages of documentation that dismantled, line by line, every calculation she had made. He called Adaize at 7:45 the next morning, standing in his kitchen with the coffee still brewing. She picked up on the second ring. He said, "The investigator you mentioned, Wendell Oates. I want to retain him." A brief pause. Not surprise, more like confirmation. "I'll send him your number this morning. He may already be expecting your call." Tobias didn't ask what that meant. He said, "Thank you," and hung up. Wendell called at 8:12. His voice was low and even, the voice of a man who had delivered bad news so many times that he had worn all the rough edges off it. He asked 2 questions, the subject's name and whether Tobias had a preference on timeline. Tobias said he needed it thorough, and he needed it to hold up in court. Wendell said he understood, and they arranged a delivery meeting in 2 weeks at a diner near the airport. That was the entirety of the call. 1 minute and 40 seconds. The diner was called Carver's. It sat on a service road between 2 car rental facilities and a long-term parking garage, the kind of place that existed mostly for people passing through rather than people staying. Plastic menus in a holder by the window, booths with cracked vinyl seats, repaired with electrical tape the color of old mustard, coffee that came automatically and stayed hot because the pot never sat long enough to cool. Wendell was already there when Tobias arrived. He was a large man, broad through the shoulders, somewhere in his late 50s, with a gray mustache trimmed with military precision and the unhurried stillness of someone who had learned long ago that patience was the most efficient tool in the kit. He had a manila folder on the table in front of him and a cup of coffee he was not drinking. He slid the folder across when Tobias sat down. No preamble, no editorializing. Tobias opened it. The affair had started 4 years ago. Not recently. Not a lapse or a crisis or a moment of weakness that spiraled. 4 years. Documented across hotel records in Charlotte, Atlanta, and Raleigh. 6 separate occasions where Wendell's associate had placed Claudette and a man named Bryce Whitmore in the same location and captured it. Time-stamped photographs, clear, unambiguous, legally obtained and notarized. Bryce Whitmore, 44 years old, boutique real estate developer out of Charlotte, professionally successful, the kind of man whose LinkedIn headshot looked like it had been lit by someone who understood exactly what it was supposed to communicate. Tobias looked at the photographs. He looked at each one once. Then he turned the page. The message records were next. Obtained through proper legal channels. Wendell had a note attached explaining the method, and it was clean. Everything admissible. Claudette and Bryce. 11 months of communications, printed and indexed by date. He read through the first pages steadily. Then he slowed. There was a thread that started 18 months ago. Around the same time Cornelius's health had entered its final decline. Claudette and Bryce were not just coordinating time together, they were coordinating something larger, a timeline. There were references to the process and the filing and when the moment is right. The language was careful in the way that careful language sometimes becomes its own kind of evidence, deliberate, managed, aware that it might be seen. Claudette's word for what they were waiting for appeared in a message dated 14 months ago. Once the financial event happens, we move. Not before. There's no point in filing before there's something to claim. Tobias sat with that sentence. He read it again. A financial event. The estate reading, his grandfather's death, the unsealing of a document that had been sitting in Adaise's files for 20 years, waiting. Claudette had known, or suspected, or calculated, that something was coming. She had positioned herself beside him for 8 years, waited for the moment when it would become visible, and designed her exit around claiming it. He turned to the last page. There was one final message, sent the afternoon of the estate reading. The same afternoon Claudette had sat across from him in a cedar-scented office on the 14th floor and laughed at $1. The timestamp read 4:47 p.m. Tobias had still been at Adaise's office at 4:47 p.m. He got everything. We need to move the timeline up. He closed the folder. He sat for a moment in the booth at Carver's Diner, with the coffee going warm beside him and the flat gray light coming through the window, and Wendell Oates across from him, not speaking, not filling the silence with anything. Then Tobias said, "I need a copy of this entire file sent directly to Adaise Okafor. Everything. Nothing held back." Wendell nodded. "Already packaged for attorney delivery. I can have it to her office by end of day." Tobias said, "Good." He placed the folder back on the table, precise, the way he had been taught to put things down. "What do I owe you?" Wendell named a number. Tobias wrote the check on the spot. He drove straight to Adaise's office. She had the file by the time he arrived. Wendell moved quickly when the job was done, and she had already read the first third of it. She did not comment on the photographs. She did not comment on the message records. She gestured to the chair across from her desk and waited for him to sit. He sat. He said, "I want the full equitable distribution response prepared. Everything. The trust documentation. The pre-marital timeline. All of it organized for court. And I want a separate civil fraud filing initiated against any financial entity connected to Bryce Whitmore, whatever corporate structure he's operating under. I want it identified, and I want it named." Adaise made 2 notes on the legal pad in front of her. Unhurried. "The distribution response is already in draft. We began it after the continuation hearing. The civil filing will require a forensic accountant to identify the specific entities before we can name them. I have someone I use. She's thorough, and she's fast." "How fast?" 10 days. Maybe 8. "Use her." Adaise wrote that down too. They worked through the framework for the next 3 hours. The trust documentation, 40 pages already drafted. 3 specialists already consulted. Every appraisal already certified. The marital estate inventory. The timeline of the marriage's finances. She asked him specific questions about joint accounts, about money he had moved into Claudette's business when it needed it, about the years when Hargrove & Co. had run short. He answered each one directly, without emotion, with the precision of a man who had always paid close attention to where money went and why. It was past midnight when he left. He sat in his car in the parking deck for a while before he started the engine. The deck was mostly empty. Fluorescent lights buzzed 2 levels up. Somewhere below him, a car door closed, and an engine turned over. And then there was quiet again. He thought about the phrase, a financial event. That was what he had been to her. Not a marriage, not a life, a position, a proximity, a strategic place to stand while she waited for an event she could leverage. He had loved her. He knew that was still true. The grief of it sat in his chest like something heavy and permanent, and he did not try to move it. He just sat with it in the dark of the parking deck and let it be what it was. Then he started the car. He drove home through empty streets, and the city moved past the windows dark and quiet, and he did not turn on the radio. The forensic accountant's name was Rita Ashe. Adaise said she was thorough and fast. She was both. She arrived at Tobias's scheduled meeting with Adaise the following morning carrying a yellow legal pad and a laptop, asked him 12 direct questions about the structure of the joint marital accounts and the history of his contributions to Hargrove & Co. Sons. and left within 40 minutes. She did not speculate. She did not editorialize. She said she would have a preliminary picture in 5 days and a complete documented report in 8. She had it in 7. Adaize called Tobias on a Thursday evening. She said the report was ready. She said he should come in. She said, "Ask Patrice if she can be there." He did not ask why. He called Patrice. She said, "Tell me when." The conference room at Okafor and Associates held a long oval table, 4 leather chairs, and a window that looked out over the downtown skyline at night. The buildings lit against the dark, the city going about its business, indifferent. Adaize had the report waiting when they arrived. A bound document, maybe 30 pages, with Rita Ash's firm name on the cover, and a table of contents that Tobias scanned once before turning to page 1. He read it straight through. He did not skip ahead. He did not ask questions while he was reading. He just read. Patrice sat beside him and did not speak. Hargrove & Coers had been insolvent for 3 years, not struggling, not in a rough patch. Insolvent, operationally dead, kept breathing entirely by outside money. The business's own revenues had not covered its operating costs since the 2nd year of that period. What kept it alive, what paid the vendors and the subscriptions and the office space and the professional photography Claudette used for her social media presence, all of it, was $180,000 in transfers from the joint marital account. Tobias's salary, his years of packed lunches, and a decade-old Camry and vacations that were pleasant, but not extravagant, transferred out, categorized as business investment and owner contribution, and fed into a company that was producing nothing. He turned the page. A secondary account had been opened in Claudette's name alone, 26 months ago. It was not a business account. It was a personal savings account at a bank they had never used together, in her name only, with no connection on paper to the joint finances. It had been receiving transfers from Hargrove & Coers on a regular schedule, labeled in the business ledger as consulting fees and contractor retainers. The contractor was a Delaware LLC, registered 18 months ago. He turned the page again. The LLC, listed in the Delaware Registry as Whitmore Capital Consulting Group, LLC, had no web presence, no office address on record, no documented clients other than Hargrove & Co. Its registered agent was a law office in Wilmington that handled incorporations in volume and asked no questions. One layer of corporate structure separated the LLC from its beneficial owner. That owner was Bryce Whitmore. Tobias set the report flat on the table. He looked at the window, at the city out there, lit and going on, not caring about any of this. The money had traveled in a complete circle, from his salary into the joint account, from the joint account into Claudette's business, from the business into a shell company registered to her lover, from that shell company into a private savings account in Claudette's name, a cushion, a landing pad, a private pool of capital she had been quietly filling for over 2 years in preparation for the life she intended to step into the moment the divorce was done. She had used his money to build her exit. She had run it through her own failing business to disguise it. She had paid the man she was leaving him for with funds Tobias had earned and deposited and never once questioned because he had trusted her. The grief was there. It was always there. But underneath it now was something else. Not rage, not heat. Something quieter and more precise. The feeling of a man looking at a structural diagram and seeing exactly where the load-bearing wall was and exactly where the crack ran. Patrice put her hand over his on the table. She did not say anything. She did not need to. He stayed like that for a moment. Then he looked at Adaize. Add the marital waste claim to the equitable distribution filing. Every dollar. Documented. I want the court to see the complete accounting. Adaize wrote it down. And the civil fraud suit against the LLC, I want that filed separately. Name Whitmore directly as beneficial owner. Daisy, don't let that wait. It won't, she said. They left together a little after 9. The building's lobby was empty, the elevator quiet, the parking deck cool and still under the hum of the overhead lights. They reached their cars, parked side by side, the way they always arranged it when they met somewhere unfamiliar, an old habit from childhood neither of them had ever named. Patrice stopped. She looked at him for a moment before she spoke. 2 years ago, she said, I saw her car outside the Marriott on Independence Boulevard on a Wednesday night. She paused. I didn't say anything because I wasn't certain enough. I'm sorry, Toby. He was quiet for a moment. You're certain now, he said. That's what matters. The kitchen smelled like coffee and dish soap when Tobias came downstairs the next morning. Claudette was already at the counter, hair done, dressed, a mug in one hand and her phone in the other, scrolling through something with the focused calm of a woman who had decided exactly how she intended to move through the world today and had committed to it fully. She looked up when he came in. Morning, she said. Warm enough, not too warm. Morning. He poured his coffee. She moved slightly to give him space at the counter. A precise, practiced adjustment, like two professionals sharing a small office. No friction, no coldness sharp enough to name. Just the careful geometry of two people who had agreed, without saying so, to keep everything functional until the lawyers finished their work. This was the register of their household now. Since the Exhibit A hearing, since Bale's 40-page brief sat on the conference table, and the number $312 million hung in the air of that room like smoke. Since all of that, Claudette had recalibrated. The warmth she used to deploy strategically had been put away. In its place was something more efficient. She spoke to him about logistics, schedules, which bills were coming due and from which accounts. The practical language of a shared space being quietly, methodically unwound. He could feel the discipline it cost her. He respected it in a distant way, the way you respect a structure even after you have already identified every crack in it. She did not know about Wendell's report. She did not know about Rita Ashe, or the 30-page document sitting in Adaiza's file cabinet with her name on every other page. She did not know about the Delaware LLC's registered agent, or the secondary savings account, or the civil fraud filing that Adaiza had already prepared and would be submitting before the end of the week. She knew about the trust. That was all she knew. And she had built her entire current strategy around the assumption that the trust was the obstacle, the one wall she had to find a way around or argue past. She was not building her strategy around what she did not know. That was her mistake. It had been her mistake for 18 months. That evening, after dinner, she had cooked, she still cooked, it was part of the maintenance. She sat across from him at the kitchen table and brought up the house. I've been thinking about the equity, she said. She kept her voice practical. A business conversation, not a personal one. Refinancing now makes sense. Rates are still reasonable and we've built up a solid position. It would give both of us something more workable to deal with during proceedings. He looked at her. He let a moment pass. I'll look into it, he said. She nodded. She seemed satisfied. She picked up her wine glass. He had absolutely no intention of touching the house. A few nights later, she raised Adaiza again. She was careful about it this time. She didn't frame it as criticism. She framed it as concern. She said that estate attorneys and divorce proceedings were different disciplines, that she just wanted to make sure Tobias had someone in his corner whose focus was entirely on the divorce itself, rather than divided between the estate and the litigation. He listened to the whole thing. Then he said, Adaiza has handled the Everett family's legal matters for 40 years. I trust her completely. Claudette looked at him for a moment. Of course, she said. I just want you to have the right support. I do, he said. She let it go. She picked up her phone. He watched her in the evenings, not with bitterness, not with the hot, restless attention of a man who was looking for something to hurt him, just with the quiet observation of someone who had learned a long time ago to read what people revealed when they thought they were composed. The jaw was tighter than it used to be, just slightly. A small, persistent tension she had been carrying for about 2 weeks now, since Bryce had stopped answering. He could see it in the way she held her phone, in the extra hour she spent on it each night before bed, in the particular quality of her focus when she was scrolling through her messages, looking for something, not finding it. She said nothing about it. He said nothing about it. He knew exactly what she was looking for. He knew why she wasn't finding it. He said nothing. After dinner on a Thursday, he told her he was going to get some air. He went out through the back door and stood in the yard. October had settled in fully now. The air was cool and carried the smell of dry leaves and distant chimney smoke. The yard was dark at the edges, lit faintly by the light coming through the kitchen window behind him. The neighborhood was quiet. Somewhere down the street, someone's dog was making itself known about something, then stopped. He stood there. He let it come. The grief of it, the real shape of it. 8 years. A woman he had loved honestly, with everything he actually had. A kitchen table, a packed lunch, a decade-old car. A life built in good faith and inhabited fully while she was building something else entirely in the space beside it. He let himself feel the full weight of that. He did not rush it. Then he breathed the October air, slow and even, and he put it down. He went back inside. He was ready. The call took 4 minutes. Tobias reached Bryce Whitmore's development firm at 9:15 on a Friday morning, asked for a consultation regarding a mixed-use infrastructure project near the city's transit corridor, and was transferred to Bryce's assistant before he had finished the sentence. The assistant was efficient and cheerful. She had an opening on Monday at 2. Tobias said Monday at 2 was fine. He thanked her and hung up. He sat at his kitchen table for a moment, the same table where he had read Cornelius's death notice, where he had read the divorce filing, where he had read Wendell's report with his hands flat and his face still. He thought about none of those things. He finished his coffee. He rinsed the mug and put it in the rack to dry. He went to work. Bryce Whitmore's office was on the 12th floor of a building in South End. Glass-walled, deliberately impressive, positioned to communicate exactly the kind of success that needed to be visible from across the room. The furniture was clean-lined and expensive. The view looked out over the city's skyline in a way that had clearly been considered during the lease negotiation. Bryce himself stood when Tobias came in. He was broad-shouldered, well-dressed, carrying the easy confidence of a man who had walked into enough rooms to know how they tended to go. He assessed Tobias in the first 3 seconds. Tobias felt it, the quick professional calibration, and arrived at an answer that made his handshake warm and his smile relaxed. Manageable. That was the word sitting behind Bryce's eyes. Tobias had seen it before. He had been letting people arrive at that word his entire adult life. "Tobias," Bryce said, "good to meet you. Have a seat." They sat across from each other at the desk. Bryce's assistant had brought water without being asked. There was a view of the skyline behind him and a whiteboard covered in project schematics to the left. Bryce asked about the transit corridor project. What phase, what scope, who else was involved? He asked with the attentive energy of a man who genuinely liked talking about development. Tobias answered in clean, credible detail. He had done his research. He knew exactly enough about the project to hold the conversation for 4 minutes, which was exactly how long he needed to hold it. 4 minutes and 30 seconds in, Tobias reached down to his briefcase. He did not hurry. He set the briefcase flat on his knee, opened it, and removed 3 documents. He placed them on the desk, one at a time in a straight line facing Bryce, with the same unhurried precision of a man setting a table. First, a photograph. Bryce and Claudette, outside the Marriott on Independence Boulevard. Time-stamped. Clear. Second, a hotel receipt. Atlanta, 14 months ago. Bryce's corporate card. Third, the first page of the Delaware LLC registration. The registered agent line with Bryce Whitmore's name printed on it in plain black type. Bryce looked at the 3 documents. Then he looked up at Tobias. He started to speak. Tobias raised one hand, not sharply, not aggressively, just enough. "I have documentation of all of it," Tobias said. His voice was level, quiet, the voice of a man stating facts to another man who needed to hear them clearly. The affair. 4 years, Charlotte, Atlanta, Raleigh. The LLC registration and the transfers from my wife's business account. Every dollar, every date, every location. It was prepared by a licensed investigator and reviewed by counsel. It is thorough. Bryce's expression had gone through several things in the space of a few seconds. The warmth was gone. In its place was the focused, very still attention of a man doing fast arithmetic. Tobias continued, "I have 2 things to tell you. The first is that my attorneys have filed a civil fraud suit against your LLC for the misappropriation of marital funds. That proceeding is active and on the public record. It will attach to your name and your company name in every professional background search anyone runs on you for the next decade. Every investor, every lender, every partner." He paused. "The second thing is that the suit becomes unnecessary if you remove yourself from this situation completely and permanently. No contact with my wife, no returned calls, no future arrangement of any kind." He let it sit for a moment. "You made a business decision to get into this. I'm offering you a business decision to get out." The room was very quiet. Bryce looked at the documents on his desk. He looked at Tobias. He was running the numbers. Tobias could see it. The precise, self-interested calculation of a man assessing a risk profile that had changed beyond recovery. Claudette had been a manageable investment. She was not manageable anymore. The man sitting across from him was not the man Bryce had spent 4 years imagining. "We're done," Bryce said. Tobias nodded once. He gathered the 3 documents, returned them to his briefcase, and closed the latch. He stood. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He did not shake Bryce's hand. He walked out. Within 4 days, Claudette's calls to Bryce went unanswered. All of them. Wendell's associate documented her arriving at Bryce's South End office building on a Wednesday afternoon, documented her in the lobby, documented the conversation with the front desk, documented her walking back out through the glass doors 12 minutes later with the particular set to her shoulders of a woman who had just been told that the person she came to see was not available and would not be made available. She did not go back. The landing pad was gone. The account, the arrangement, the man, the exit she had spent 4 years and $180,000 of Tobias's money constructing, all of it gone. What remained was a Delaware LLC with a civil fraud suit attached to it and a woman who had run out of positions to fall back to. That evening, Tobias called Adayezi. She answered on the second ring. He asked whether the equitable distribution hearing preparation was complete and whether the civil fraud filing against Bryce's LLC had been formally submitted. Adayezi said, "Both are done. The hearing is in 2 weeks. Everything is in place." He thanked her. He set the phone down on the kitchen table. The courtroom smelled like wood polish and recycled air. Judge Alberta Price's courtroom was not a dramatic place. It was not designed to be. Fluorescent lights, wood paneling the color of old honey, rows of gallery seats bolted to the floor in neat, indifferent lines. The kind of room that had seen enough human wreckage to stop being surprised by any of it. Tobias sat at the respondent's table beside Adaze. Dark suit, pressed shirt. His hands rested flat on the table in front of him, and he was completely still in the way that had always come naturally to him. Not the stillness of a man suppressing something, but the stillness of a man who had already done everything that needed doing and was now simply present for the result. Adaize had a legal file open in front of her. She was reviewing it with quiet efficiency, making a small notation with her pen, turning a page. She looked like a woman who had been in this room many times before and found it entirely unremarkable. Patrice was in the gallery, third row. She gave Tobias one small nod when he sat down. He acknowledged it without turning his head all the way, then faced forward. At the petitioner's table, Claudette sat beside Jeffrey Bale. She was dressed precisely. The dark blazer, the composed posture, the leather portfolio open in front of her. Her pen was in her hand. She had prepared for this in the way she prepared for everything, completely, strategically, and with the absolute confidence of a woman who believed she was the most prepared person in any room she entered. Judge Price called the hearing to order. Jeffrey Bale presented first. He was skilled. He was thorough. He spoke about 8 years of marital contribution, the household sustained, the domestic stability provided, the professional brand built alongside the marriage. He used phrases like reasonable expectations and equitable consideration. He referenced the Everett estate with deliberate care, not as a claim, he was clear about that, but as relevant context for the court's understanding of the full financial picture of the marriage. He was building a frame, a sympathetic one. He was good at his job. Tobias listened without expression. Then Adaize stood. She did not editorialize. She did not perform. She entered the trust documentation into evidence piece by piece. The founding instrument dated March 14, 2003. The funding history, the independent appraisals, the specialist certifications, and she stated the legal conclusion in plain language that left no surface for argument to grip. The trust predated the marriage by 17 years, was funded entirely by Cornelius Everett's separate assets, and belonged exclusively, and without legal ambiguity, to Tobias Allen Everett, pre-marital separate property, not subject to equitable distribution, not part of the marital estate. Then she reached for a second file. She placed it in front of Judge Price, with the same unhurried care she had used for everything else. She placed a copy in front of Jeffrey Bale. She began to read. 3 years of insolvency at Hargrove & Co. Pulse. $180,000 transferred from the joint marital account. Documented to the penny. Dates, amounts, receiving accounts, all of it. A secondary account in Claudette's name alone. Transfers categorized as consulting fees and contractor retainers. A Delaware LLC registered 18 months ago. 1 layer of corporate structure. 1 name on the registered agent line. She did not say Bryce Whitmore's name out loud. She did not need to. She said, "The respondent submits that this constitutes marital waste under North Carolina General Statute 5020 and asks the court to factor it fully into the equitable distribution calculation." Bale's pen was still. He asked for a 15-minute recess. His voice was professionally even. His face was not. In the hallway, Tobias sat on a bench near a narrow window. The light outside was flat and gray, the particular October light that made everything look like it had already been decided. Adaize stood nearby, phone in hand, composed and efficient. At the far end of the hallway, Claudette stood with Bale. She was holding her portfolio against her chest with both arms crossed over it, like something to hold on to. Bale was speaking close to her ear. Whatever he was telling her, she did not like it. Tobias could see it from where he sat, in the tight line of her jaw, in the way her chin had dropped slightly, in the particular stillness of a woman whose arithmetic had stopped balancing. She looked up. She saw Tobias watching. He did not look away. He did not change his expression. He simply held her gaze across the length of that hallway, across the 8 years, and the certified letter, and the laugh that had sat in Adaize's office like a dropped glass. and he let her look at whatever she needed to see. She looked back to bail. Court reconvened. Judge Price reviewed her notes. She did not rush. When she spoke, her voice was level and entirely without drama. The voice of a woman who had rendered a great many decisions and understood that the weight of them did not require amplification. She ruled the Everett Trust excluded from equitable distribution in full. She noted that the legal documentation supporting its premarital status was among the most thoroughly prepared she had encountered in a proceeding of this nature. Then she turned to the forensic accounting. She looked at Jeffrey Bail. "Is your client disputing these figures?" Bail leaned toward Claudette. A brief, quiet exchange. Tobias watched Claudette's face during it. It was the face of a woman who had run out of positions to take. Bail straightened. "No, Your Honor," Judge Price ruled. The $180,000 in documented marital waste was deducted from Claudette's share before the split was calculated. The remaining marital assets, the house proceeds, the joint accounts, were divided per the adjusted figure. When the final numbers were read into the record, they were legal. They were fair. They were nowhere near what Claudette had planned. Not $1 of the $312 million. Not 1 acre of Alabama land. Not 1/4 of timber revenue. Not 1 cent of 60 years of silence and discipline and absolute, unbroken patience. Judge Price closed the hearing. Tobias picked up his briefcase. He stood. He buttoned the top button of his jacket with one hand, smoothed the front, and walked toward the courtroom door at a steady, unhurried pace. He did not look at Claudette. In the hallway, Patrice was exactly where she said she would be. She didn't say anything. She put her hand on his arm, just her hand, steady and warm, and they walked together toward the elevator at the end of the hall. Neither of them spoke. The morning after the hearing, Tobias arrived at Adaize's office at 8 o'clock sharp. The city was still waking up outside the 14th floor windows. Charlotte, in early November. The last of the leaves on the trees along Tryon Street. The sky a pale, washed-out blue that had not decided yet whether it would amount to anything. Tobias sat across from Adaize at her conference table with a cup of coffee he had brought himself and a legal pad he would not need to write much on. Adaize opened her file. "Bail called last night," she said. She set her reading glasses on. "He has advised Claudette against appeal. I expected as much. There is no legal theory under which she reaches that trust. He knows it. She knows it now, too." Tobias nodded once. 60 days to finalization. The house goes to market as soon as we file the sale order. I expect it moves in 30 days or less. After the marital waste deduction comes off her share, her settlement will be processed, transferred, and done. She looked at him over her glasses. "It's a legal settlement. It's a fair one." "I know," Tobias said. "Just not the one she planned." "No," he said. "Not that one." He drank his coffee. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past on the street below. 14 floors down, small and slow and ordinary. Adaize turned a page. "Bryce Whitmore's attorneys made contact yesterday afternoon. They want to settle the LLC suit. Confidential payment, mutual release, and," she paused, just slightly, "a non-disclosure agreement." Tobias looked at her. "They want their client's name protected," she said. "The transfers are already in the public divorce record," Tobias said. "Yes. There's nothing to disclose that isn't already disclosed." "That's precisely what I told them." A short silence. "I'll accept the financial settlement," Tobias said. "I won't sign the NDA." Adaize made a small notation in her file. "I'll communicate that today." She did not appear surprised. She appeared, if anything, quietly satisfied in the way of a person watching a carefully constructed mechanism execute exactly as designed. The settlement from Bryce arrived within 2 weeks. Full amount. Documented to the dollar of loss plus damages. No confidentiality clause attached. Bryce wrote the check because the alternative was a full civil trial. His LLC's financial records entered into the public record in far greater detail than they currently existed. Every transfer, every categorized fee, every corporate layer exposed under oath in open court. He paid. He paid without a word of public protest and without the protection of a sealed agreement. Paying, as it turned out, was only the beginning of what it cost him. The settlement became known the way things become known in tight professional circles, not through a press release, not through a news article, but through the quiet, efficient movement of information between attorneys who spoke to other attorneys, between investors whose due diligence teams pulled court records as a matter of standard practice, between the particular silence that falls in certain rooms when a specific name comes up and no one rushes to fill it. Two investors in Bryce's active development project, a $40 million mixed-use build near the city's transit corridor, the same project he had used as a pretext for the meeting where Tobias placed 3 documents on his desk, requested an independent financial audit after the settlement became known. The audit found nothing criminal. It found enough that was uncomfortable. One investor withdrew his commitment entirely. The project stalled for 4 months while Bryce restructured his financing and absorbed the loss of momentum, the cost of delay, and the new oversight requirements attached to every subsequent disbursement. The project moved forward eventually, smaller, slower, with Bryce's name on the documents carrying a weight it had not carried before. A second project, a luxury townhome development he had been pitching to a community investment group for 3 months, was declined without extended negotiation. The group's chair communicated through counsel that the organization maintained a standing policy against partnering with any principal involved in fraud litigation, regardless of settlement outcome. The door closed cleanly and without drama, in the way that certain doors close when the decision was made before the meeting started. The woman Bryce had begun seeing publicly after cutting off Claudette, the conspicuous, swift pivot that Wendell had documented and Tobias had noted without comment, lasted 7 months. She was a marketing executive, sharp, thorough. She conducted her own research with the same methodical efficiency she applied to everything professionally important to her. She found the court records. She found the settlement. She found enough to make a clear-eyed decision that required no dramatic conversation and no extended explanation. She ended the relationship over dinner, professionally, without cruelty. Bryce tried once to explain. She told him she did not need an explanation. She needed him to leave. By the end of the year, Bryce Whitmore had relocated his primary business operations to another city. He still worked. He still earned. His name still appeared on project documents and investor correspondence and development filings in a new market where the specific weight it carried in Charlotte had not yet followed him. But the version of Bryce Whitmore who had walked into his glass-walled office and looked across his desk at Tobias Everett and seen someone manageable, who had made a business decision to enter another man's marriage, to move that man's money through a shell company, to build a future on the foundational assumption that the man across from him was exactly as ordinary as he appeared. That version did not exist anymore. He had made a business decision. The business decision had settled. The damage had not. 18 months after the divorce was finalized, Tobias Everett sat in his grandfather's reading chair and watched the afternoon light move across the floor. It came in through the west-facing window in a slow, even bar, warm and amber and unhurried, the way Atlanta light got in late November when the sun dropped early and meant it. It crossed the hardwood in a straight line, moved up the leg of his desk, and disappeared into the wall of bookshelves he had spent 2 weekends filling with the patience he applied to everything that mattered to him. He had been timing his reading around that light for 6 months. He knew exactly when it arrived and exactly how long it stayed. The house was a restored craftsman in Atlanta's historic West End. Wide front porch, tall ceilings, Rooms with the kind of proportions that felt generous without being excessive. He had purchased it without urgency, renovated it with care, and settled into it the way a man settles into something that fits. Not too fast, not performing anything, just quietly, completely, at his actual size. On the wall above the desk, in a dark wood frame, hung a photograph of Cornelius James Everett, taken in Birmingham in 1962, the year of his first land purchase. He was wearing a formal dark suit that he had clearly pressed himself. His hands, enormous, cracked at the knuckles even then, built for work he had been doing since he was old enough to be useful, rested at his sides. His expression was the expression of a man who already knew how the story ended. Not arrogant, not soft, just certain, in the way of someone who has made every decision he needed to make, and is simply waiting for time to confirm it. Tobias looked at the photograph every morning. He looked at it now. He still worked. Consulting, part-time, infrastructure projects in underserved municipalities, the kind of work that connected a civil engineer's skill set to something larger than a billing cycle. He chose it. He could have stopped entirely, and he had considered it. And then he had gone to a project site in southwest Atlanta on a Tuesday morning, and stood in a neighborhood where the stormwater system was 40 years past its useful life, and watched a woman in her 60s navigate a flooded sidewalk with careful, practiced steps. And he had not considered stopping again after that. The Everett Trust, under the active management of the wealth firm his grandfather had selected decades ago, had grown. The number was larger now than the number Adazi had read into the record in that conference room off Judge Price's courtroom. It would be larger still next year. Cornelius had built something that did not stop when he did. Earlier that year, Tobias had established the Cornelius James Everett Scholarship, first-generation black engineering students in Alabama, Georgia, and North Carolina. 12 students in the inaugural cohort. He had attended the award ceremony in Birmingham in the spring, standing in a city built on soil where his grandfather had picked cotton as a boy, and he had looked out at those 12 young faces and thought about what a man can build if he builds quietly enough, and long enough, and with enough faith in the person he is building it for. He had not made a speech about the trust. He had not mentioned the $312 million. He had said only that his grandfather taught him that a full hand and a quiet mouth would take a person further than a loud voice and empty pockets, and that he hoped they remembered it. Several of them wrote it down. Patrice had visited the weekend before, flew down from Charlotte on a Friday evening, and left Sunday afternoon, and in between they had sat on the back porch in the mild Atlanta November and talked about Cornelius the way people talk about someone they are still learning, even after his death, even after everything. They did not talk about Claudette. They did not talk about Bryce. He knew, didn't he? Patrice said at one point. Not quite a question. He knew something like this might happen. Tobias took his time with it. A cardinal landed on the porch railing and left. He didn't know the specifics, Tobias said, but he knew that money makes people show you who they are. So he built something that would make sure I saw it clearly, legally, and in a room full of witnesses. Patrice shook her head slowly, the way she did when something settled into place that had been loose for a long time. 60 years of silence, and he still got the last word. He always got the last word, Tobias said. He just never needed to say it out loud. He had been spending time with a woman named Deja, a landscape architect. She designed public green spaces for municipalities, which meant they had more professional overlap than either of them had anticipated when they first met at a city planning event in September. She laughed without performing it. She asked direct questions and waited for real answers. She had told him, early and without self-consciousness, that she had no interest in knowing what a man was worth financially before she understood what he was worth as a human being. He had not known what to do with that for several days. He was taking his time. He was in no hurry. He was moving at his own pace and in his own direction, with no calculation behind it and no exit strategy beneath it. Just the simple, honest forward motion of a man who had finally cleared enough space to move that way. Evening settled over Atlanta slowly, the way it did in November, the amber light in the study fading to something softer, the street outside going quiet, the house holding itself around him with the easy solidity of a place that had been built to last. Tobias sat in his grandfather's reading chair, the same chair that had sat in a study in Birmingham for 40 years, the same chair where Cornelius had read his land surveys and his quarterly statements and his Bible in no particular order of priority, while the world outside assumed it knew what kind of man he was and was wrong about it every single time. He thought about the wax seal, the cream-colored envelope, the legal instruction, precise, irrevocable, designed to execute itself in the most protected and witnessed and legally unassailable setting that a very careful man could construct across 6 decades of absolute discipline. He thought about the conference room off Judge Price's courtroom, and Adaise's level voice, and the moment the number landed in the air, and a leather portfolio and a pen that had stopped moving, and a woman who had walked into that room believing she was the most prepared person in it. Cornelius did not leave him money. He left him armor, fitted specifically, built decades before it was needed, before the marriage, before the filing, before the laugh that sat in a room like a dropped glass, because the man in that photograph had understood, with the absolute certainty of someone who had built everything he had from nothing, that what is built in silence is harder to steal than what is built loudly, and that the right person, given the right protection, at exactly the right moment, would know what to do with it. He had known his grandson, completely, without reservation. Somewhere in another city, Claudette was rebuilding, from the ground up, with her own resources, without the cushion she had spent 4 years constructing, without the fortune she had spent 8 years positioned beside, and without the man she had looked at every morning across a kitchen table and never once fully seen. Somewhere in another city, Bryce Whitmore was working, his pipeline thinner, his name carrying a specific weight in certain rooms that it had not carried before. The version of himself who had looked across a glass desk and seen someone manageable permanently retired. And here, in a craftsman house on a quiet street in the West End of Atlanta, in a chair that still held the shape of the man who built everything, Tobias Everett was at peace. Completely. Without performance. Without pretense. Without apology. She laughed at $1. His grandfather built the answer 60 years before she walked into the room. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.